And welcome back to the Social Psychology chapter. At this part, we're going to begin the section on social influence. Social influence is the broader topic that covers conformity and the various subtypes of conformity that occur that we're going to be covering. To begin with, we're going to start talking about social facilitation. Social facilitation is going to involve the norms and roles that influence individuals with respect to whether or not they will take direction from other people as to how to behave. When we talk about conformity, we're going to be talking about two general types of conformity: informational conformity and normative conformity. Informational conformity refers to conformity in which you are given information before you're ever in the situation in which you're going to express conformity. So, for example, if I say, when you come to my grandmother's funeral, because you're not a family member, you're not allowed to speak. So stand in a corner and be by yourself and not talk to anybody. Once you get to the funeral, you're going to know how to behave. And that's what informational conformity is. If, however, you went to the funeral and you were not sure how to behave, normative conformity would be the primary process that would take place, because you would match your behavior to the behavior of everybody else, and so you would do as everybody else is doing. That's the norm of behavior of that time. So when you match your behavior to the behavior of everybody else, that's referred to as normative conformity. Informational conformity is simply being given information about how to behave ahead of time before you get into the situation itself. Conformity studies largely get their start back in the 1950s with a fella named Solomon Asch. And Asch creates a study which uses deception to evaluate the conformity of a single individual subject in a room full of Confederates that are working with Asch. Now, what Confederates are in social psychology experiments are people that are pretending to be subjects in the experiment, but they are actually paid members. Oftentimes graduate students that are pretending to be undergraduates, so they have a particular role to play, and they create a social environment that functions in a particular manner that they want to evaluate whether or not the real subject behaves one way or another. In Asch's conformity studies, what they did is they had about 5 Confederates and 1 real subject. And an experimenter comes into the room and explains that the subjects are going to look at images of lines. And when they look at these line lengths, they're going to compare whether or not the sample line is shorter or longer or equal to one of the comparison lines. So in an example that I have up on the screen, it would be very easy. Which line is closest in length to the sample line? Well, that of course would be line 3. And they do a few examples like this. They run through, it's very simple. And the way in which the subjects are arranged around the table is that the complete set of Confederates all give their answer before the actual subject in the experiment. And that way, Asch wanted to evaluate if all the Confederates made a really clear mistake, would the actual subject in the experiment follow suit and make the same mistake, or would they just say what was obviously correct? So again, even with the example that's up on the screen, if all the Confederates said that comparison line number 1 was the same length as the sample, which clearly it is not, would the actual subject say line number 1 as well after 5 people made the mistake? In fact, they do tend to follow the mistakes of the individual from the experiments. And we're going to see an example of this in a fake interview in this video.
Suspecting member An ordinary day in an ordinary place. A service station off the M42 near Birmingham. We've come here to demonstrate a basic human need, the need to follow the herd. The man in the suit is Charlie, our actor, who's conducting a bogus general knowledge survey. The people with him are also actors briefed by us, except for the woman in the orange shirt.
Question one, I'll start at your end. Where do we get ham from?
Pig. 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 Pig.
Easy, but now some impossible ones.
What is the cube root of 97?
14.
A completely wrong, made-up answer.
Yeah, 14.
14.
14. 14.
Like, I was put at the end of the line and I didn't know half the questions asked to me, and so it sounded right to me. 4 out of 5 people said it, so why shouldn't I say it? So I think it's an automatic reaction to say or to go along with what people say.
What is the capital of Makata? What is the capital of Makata?
Jedi.
No such places as Makata or Jedi.
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 Jedi. The first man I thought was rather intelligent, answering all the questions because everybody else seemed to go along with that.
Last question. What is the speed of sound? The speed of sound?
10,010 miles per hour.
Miles out.
Yeah, 10,010 miles an hour.
10,010 miles per hour.
10,010 miles per hour.
10,010 miles per hour.
Okay.
I didn't want to look stupid. Everybody else seemed to know the answer, and so I said it too.
So let's take a look at a question that's related to this video. Which is most like the conformity studied by Asch? And the answer is C, looking up because others are. In a scenario like that, if you have a variety of other people that are all doing the same thing and then you conform to them, that would be similar to what we would refer to as Asch conformity. The other examples don't do that. Greeting others at a party because you were told to do so, you're doing it because you were told to do so. Leaving a slow-moving line has nothing to do with conformity, and feeling confused because you don't want to punish your child, again, has nothing to do with conformity itself. Now let's take another look at a video related to conformity. However, this time we're going to look at a very relevant practical aspect of conformity and how it can actually lead to the issue of safety and possibly people getting harmed if they conform incorrectly.
Member of the
Here is a surprising example of negative group power. Imagine you are hired to be in a focus group to evaluate various products. An alarm goes off. Smoke pours into the room. What would you do?
The place is rigged with 4 hidden cameras and 6 concealed microphones. And psychology professor Dominic Abrams is watching from our control room, which we've built in an adjoining suite.
Now it's just a question of sitting and waiting.
Right, so this is a questionnaire all about kind of shopping habits and everything here. So just move that off your chair so you can see.
Our first participant is Mary Mizuno, a London student who thinks she's arrived early. What she doesn't know is that behind this door there's about to be a serious fire in the hotel kitchen, or at least the illusion of one, created by a smoke machine and some sound effects. What will she do?
She's now noticed the smoke and is concerned. At this point, she decides to investigate to find out what's going on. She's immediately taken responsibility for figuring out what to do.
Mary does the sensible thing and evacuates quickly. She even leaves her bag and coat.
As I've never been in a fire situation before, I tried to remember the kind of things that you're supposed to do, so I left my stuff and just went out.
But Mary was on her own. This time, we've planted 7 actors who are all in on the experiment. We've said to them, when you see the smoke, do nothing. Our second participant is Lauren Heffernan, also a student. What will she do?
In this situation, she'll be following a script. The script is partly written in her mind. It's a script which is borrowed from things like sitting exams. Most situations like this have some element of expected or scripted behaviour.
But what will happen to her script when we make a slightly unusual situation very unusual? Nothing to start with, so we get her attention. Now, how long before she dashes out of the room?
She's checking increasingly to see what the other people are thinking. But who can she appeal to? The answer is nobody. She turns to the norm of the group. Ignore the smoke. In a real fire, the people in this group would be in very serious danger by now.
I was looking for some sort of reaction from someone else, even just the slightest little thing, that they'd recognise that there was something, you know, going on here. For me to kind of react on that and then do something about it, I kind of needed prodding.
She's waiting for someone else to react. Why isn't anyone else reacting? She feels uncomfortable. She doesn't want to embarrass herself by taking the lead, taking action. But something is definitely wrong.
Lauren stayed in the room for 20 minutes after spotting the smoke, concerned but immobile. The fire brigade say that if this fire had been real, even if flames hadn't burnt through the door, she would have died of asphyxiation in this time. In the end, we had to ask her to leave.
Pop out here. Thanks.
I was surprised that I didn't do anything at all. I was just literally waiting. I just thought that someone else is surely going to say something soon. And because no one else did, I just didn't react at all.
We tried the experiment 10 times, and the same thing happened over and over again. If the person was on their own, they left quickly. If they were in a group of 3 or more, they stayed, rooted to the spot. The average length of time they stayed, 13 minutes. In real fires, people die because of behaviour like this. In 1979, a blaze at Woolworths in Manchester killed 10 people.
The fire occurred during the day when the store was occupied by hundreds of people. Most of those people managed to get out quite safely. The people that died in the fire were actually using the restaurant at the time.
But why so many fatalities in the restaurant? Investigators eventually realised that people simply hadn't evacuated. They'd waited to pay their bills. That was their routine.
We go into a restaurant. We sit down, the waiter comes over, we choose a meal, we eat the meal, we pay for the meal, and then we leave the building. That's our script, if you like, for eating a meal.
Worse still, everyone was following the same script, and no one wanted to be the only one to stray.
One of the main reasons why people died in the Woolworths fire is because they didn't want to be the first to react. They didn't want to stand out for the crowd and went along with the crowd behaviour.
Only one person in our experiment didn't go along with the crowd behaviour, artist James McKechnie.
What's that coming up from under the table? Is it fire?
I don't know.
That's a fire.
We should just wait till she comes back. Yeah.
You think?
Yeah. She said just to wait here, didn't she?
What? Is that? What is that?
I don't know. She said just to wait here, didn't she?
What? Is that?
She's coming right down now.
James isn't going to sit in a dangerous room just because everyone else does.
Yeah.
Or is he? The power of the group proves irresistible.
The reassurances of the rest of the group that somebody else is responsible seem to be sufficient to pull him back into place. Instead of leaving the room and calling for help, He sits back down again and waits. Now everybody's looking at the smoke, but in some ways that gives the group even more influence. After all, if everybody can see the smoke and no one's panicking, well, it would be crazy for him to do it too.
James stays in the room for another 10 minutes before finally leaving. In a real fire, he wouldn't have been able to leave. He'd have been unconscious and close to suffocation.
Now let's take a look at a question related to that video. When you get to the big frat party, which of course you would know about since you're a college student, everyone is dressed in togas. You run upstairs, put on a sheet from the bed, and come down to join the festivities. Which of those answers actually explains your pattern of behavior? That would be B, the normative conformity effect. Normative conformity is when you match your behavior to the behavior of the group. That's what you saw in the video when people stayed put in the room that might have been on fire because other people were staying put. If you come to a party and everybody's dressed in togas and then you go dressed in a toga yourself, that's normative conformity. The aspects of conformity in themselves are fairly broad, and there's a variety of different ways in which you can understand conformity or social influence, if you wish. And another subtype of social influence is compliance. Now, compliance generally refers to kind of a low-grade form of conformity. You have a scenario in which a person makes a request, which is usually socially appropriate, and if you follow out that request, that would be an act of compliance. A common example of basic compliance would be if you and your roommate are sitting in the living room watching television, and you get up to get a soda from the kitchen, and your friend says, "Hey, would you please bring me back a soda when you return?" And you do so, that would be an act of compliance. Very simple, low-grade aspect of conformity based upon a request. Social influence in terms of compliance will play out in a variety of different ways. There's actually 3 examples here, and 2 of them are grouped together, the low ball procedure and the foot in the door procedure, because there's going to be so much similarity between them, so much overlap between them, that I've simply grouped them together on the slide here. But let's look at the door in the face procedure first. In the door in the face procedure, you are asked to make a large commitment with the expectation that you will wind up making a smaller commitment. And I know this is rather vague, and it needs a good example to explain why this might happen. These types of compliance have often been turned into sales routines for businesses that sell very expensive things. So for example, the door in the face procedure is a process that is oftentimes used in jewelry stores. So let's suppose you go to a jewelry store and you tell the salesperson that you have $1,000 to buy an engagement ring. One of the things that's going to happen is the salesperson is purposely going to show you a ring that costs more than $1,000 because it's the salesperson's task to get as much money out of you as possible. And of course, anything that costs more than what you have to spend is going to, of course, be larger and better. And the salesperson doesn't really know whether or not $1,000 is actually your upper limit. They have to kind of test the waters and see how far they can push you. So oftentimes what happens is the salesperson will show you something much more expensive, $1,500, even $2,000, and say, take a look at what a great ring this is. And then when you say, oh my goodness, I can't afford that much money for a ring, then they back you down to something that was still above the original border that you had said. So you go in, you say, I have $1,000 for a ring. Then they show you a $1,500 ring, and you say, well, that's great, but I can't afford it. So then they show you an $1,100 ring. See, what they're actually doing is they're showing you something less than what you really stated was really nice. but it's still $100 more than what you said you could afford originally. That's the process to try to get you to spend more than what you actually made the commitment to originally. So you're asked to make a large commitment. That's the $1,500 with the expectation you'll make a smaller commitment, an $1,100 one, even though you've already said you only have $1,000. Now, the low ball procedure and the foot in the door procedure overlap quite a bit. Let's look at the low ball procedure first. The low ball procedure is a scenario in which you're told that you only have to make a small commitment of some sort, but then after you make that commitment, greater and greater commitments are added onto it afterward. This is, again, also a sales technique that you see in a variety of stores. Mattress stores. If you go to buy a mattress and you walk around on the showroom, you might find a mattress for, let's say, $500 that you think is acceptable. When you tell the salesperson that you want the $500 mattress, they will take you to the back of the room, sit you in a chair, and then they will start running through a list of add-ons that you could have, such as a giant sturdy plastic bag in case you're ever going to move in the future and you want to protect the mattress. There's also Scotch guarding as an add-on. Then delivery charge is an add-on. There's any number of different aspects of warranties, for example, which are add-ons. So if you say yes to all these various add-ons, the $500 mattress winds up being $900 in the end. And that's what the lowball procedure is. You get a person to agree to the lower cost mattress, $500, and then you continually add things onto it. Another place you see this is in electronic stores like Best Buy. If you buy a camera, once you take it to the front at the checkout line, they'll ask you whether or not you want to buy a warranty for it. That warranty is an add-on. That whole process is part of the lowball procedure because you've already made a commitment to buy the camera, which you know how much it costs, and you've agreed to pay that, so you brought it to the checkout counter. Now there's just add-ons, warranties and protection, repairs and so forth that will be added on at the very end when you're prepared to pay. The foot in the door procedure is actually somewhat similar to the lowball procedure in that as you make a person commit to one basic thing, you continue to add it on to it. But you do it in a slightly different way. The foot in the door procedure gets its name from traveling salespeople back in the 1950s who would literally put their foot in the door jamb so that if you didn't want to buy brushes or a vacuum cleaner from this traveling salesperson and you go to close the door would just hit their foot and they would just continue to go on with their sales routine. This is obviously would be considered very inappropriate and actually somewhat of an aggressive technique, but that's exactly where the name comes from. The reason the name is applied here is because you can get an individual to make a small commitment initially, and once you have that small commitment, you continually add to it to ask for something more and then something beyond that, and you keep pushing it as far as you possibly can. Now you can see the connection between that and the lowball procedure, but the application is usually used in a slightly different way. The foot in the door procedure tends to be a lot more flexible and open-ended, so you can continually ask the person to do something. Oftentimes they are not even necessarily things to purchase, but rather tasks to do or favors to do for somebody that they continually ask for you. And probably one of the best ways for me to show you how the foot in the door procedure operates is to move on to this video where you're going to wind up seeing the process play itself out.
I'm sure most of us would hope to take appropriate heroic action when in an emergency situation. But there is another natural tendency that can make this even more difficult: blind obedience to authority.
Would you obey this man? Here's Charlie, our actor, dressed to look like he's in charge, though he's in charge of nothing except a bogus uniform. We've brought him to Edmonton in North London, to the shopping centre, to find out exactly how obedient people are.
Excuse me, madam. Sorry, could I just stop you? You're about to pass between me and the red bench. Could I just ask you to go the other side? Thanks. That's great. Oh, and just beyond the apple would be great. Oh, oh. Thanks very much, madam.
These slabs, I couldn't just ask you to knock it down for me. You're probably heavier than I am. Can you give it a good old jump? Yeah, actually, probably, let me just move that way. Can you just jump, please? Yeah, no, two-footed probably best. I couldn't just ask you to litter, could I?
To what, sorry?
To litter.
To litter?
Yeah, have you got anything you could possibly quickly litter? Do you use that? It's probably all right.
Okay.
Yeah, could you just litter for me, please, sir? Just twice would be great. Just kick it away, otherwise it won't. That's it. Give it a kick. Couldn't ask you just to pop that in your other hand, could I? Thanks, that's excellent. Could I ask you to lead with your left? Yes? And just slowly, really, basically.
It's a simple experiment, but amazingly, it works. Out of uniform, though, it's a different story.
Oh, sir, could I just ask you to switch bags with your hands? Just... You couldn't just go and just touch that brick? No?
But with the uniform, 70% of people follow Charlie's bizarre instructions to the letter.
Oh, fine. Give it one more, actually. The wind's a bit weak. That's it. You've got my dental records here. That's proof enough that this is quality sweet corn. Bit harder, please, sir.
He's in uniform.
Stop the bag.
So they obey. We asked Charlie to help us make a wedding video with a difference. The happy couple are actors. Charlie's their registrar. All we need now is a witness, and here she comes. An unsuspecting member of the public fetched off the street.
Could I have your full name, please?
Yeah, Margaret Richardson.
Margaret's offered to bail out the bride and groom, who've supposedly been let down by their friend. What she doesn't know is that Charlie's going to make a mistake. Quite a bad one.
It is my duty to remind you of the solemn and binding character of the ceremony of marriage. Now, could I ask you, please, to repeat after me? I do solemnly declare...
I do solemnly declare...
that I know not...
that I know not...
of any lawful impediment...
of any lawful impediment...
why I...
Margaret Richardson.
Margaret Richardson.
Yes.
Repeat the name, please.
Margaret Richardson.
May not be joined...
may not be joined...
in matrimony...
in matrimony...
to Peter Roy Edmonds...
to Peter Roy Edmonds. Probably initially I thought something was wrong when I started to actually say the vows. And then I really realised something was wrong when I began to place the ring on the finger.
Place the ring on his finger.
I suppose I was just standing there and everybody seemed to be in agreement with what was happening. And I was just told to do it. And for some reason I just did.
Perfect.
So did Eric Taylor.
And could you repeat after me? I call upon these persons here present...
I call upon these persons here present...
to witness that I...
to witness that I...
Eric Taylor...
Eric Taylor...
do take thee...
do take thee...
Julianne Gillett...
Julianne Gillett...
to be my lawful wedded wife...
to be my lawful wedded wife. He was putting the words into my mouth, you know? He was saying that I was to say this and I was to say that, and I was thinking that I'm the witness and the groom ain't saying nothing.
Do take thee...
Sorry?
Do take thee...
Do take thee...
Peter Roy Edmonds...
Peter Roy Edmonds...
to be my lawful wedded husband.
At one point, Margaret protests.
Sorry, I'm confused.
But Charlie's authority is irresistible.
Just repeat the phrase.
But I'm not getting married.
No, just repeat the phrase.
To be my lawful wedded husband. When I looked confused, the response was that I was confused and not the situation.
I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride.
I was just aware that this man was telling me to do this in a very sort of definite way. And there didn't seem to be an option. I'm not quite sure why.
Julianne Gillett and Eric Taylor, you have both made the declarations prescribed by law and have made a solemn and binding contract with each other in the presence of the witnesses here assembled. I now pronounce you man and wife.
When he said that we are actually married, I was scared. I was heading out the door.
Congratulations, sir. Congratulations. Kiss the bride. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, is that me?
Thank you. Yes, you're now married. Well done. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor.
Yeah. You two are married, are you?
Oh.
I'm the witness.
Ah.
I thought there was something carried wrong here.
Ah, you did put the ring on the...
Yeah, but I thought I'm the witness.
Ah, I have married you together. Is this going to be a problem?
Oh, yeah.
Well, why do they go along with it? It isn't as though he's wearing a uniform this time. But here we have a situation which we're familiar with. It's the registry office, the flowers, the table, and so on. And in that situation, we're used to people feeding us our lines. They realise something is wrong, but he reassures them. He reduces their uncertainty. And it's like when we're children. Adults give us rules, and that helps us to reduce our uncertainty as kids.
How far could someone in authority get you to do things that don't seem quite right? What about more serious things that go against your conscience and moral values? Nowhere in our education do we get training in how to differentiate just authority deserving our respect from unjust authority that merits rebellion. So we just usually do as we are told.
Now that leads us to the highest level of conformity, which would be obedience, oftentimes referred to as obedience to authority. Obedience is defined as compliance in the form of the direct command or order from authority. Now notice this is a distinction from the compliance issue in which someone requests you to do something, but it's a low-grade request. Under these scenarios, the aspect of obedience to authority refers to compliance for direct demand or an order from somebody who's in an authority position. The work on obedience to authority started with a fellow named Stanley Milgram back in the late 50s, early 60s. And the work that Milgram did is similar in the sense of Solomon Asch's work in that it used deception very widely in the experiments. Milgram had two individuals present in the experiment. There was only one real subject and one Confederate. And under these circumstances, the Confederate always played the same role of an individual who had been selected randomly to participate as an individual who would receive electric shocks as part of a learning experiment. So the actual subject was always placed in the position of having to electrocute this other individual. About 65% of the people that participate in this experiment will generally electrocute the other individual to the maximum level available in the experiment. Now keep in mind, this experiment involves deception, so nobody is being electrocuted. The entire thing is being played out under the process of deception so that the actual subject believes that they're electrocuting another person. The best way to explain how this experiment operates is to watch this lengthy video.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area. They were obtained by a newspaper advertisement and direct mail solicitation. The subjects range in occupation from corporation presidents to good humor men and plumbers, and in educational level from one who had not finished elementary school to subjects who have doctorate and other professional degrees.
Seat right here. Now, both of you have been paid, so let me sit right down. So let me say that the checks are yours simply for showing up at the lab. And from this point on, no matter what happens, the money is yours. I should like to tell both of you a little about the memory project. Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn various types of material. Some of the better-known theories are treated in the book over there, The Teaching Learning Process by Cantor. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake. A common application of this theory would be when parents spank a child if he does something wrong. But actually, we know very little about the effect of punishment on learning because almost no truly scientific studies have been made of it in human beings. For instance, we don't know how much punishment is best for learning. And we don't know how much difference it makes as to who's giving the punishment, whether an adult learns best from an older or a younger person himself, or many things of this sort. So what we're doing in the project is bringing together a number of adults of different occupations and ages, and we're asking some of them to be teachers and some to be learners. We want to find out just what effect different people have on each other as teachers and learners, and also what effect punishment will have on learning in this situation. Therefore, I'm going to ask one of you to be the teacher here this afternoon, and the other to be the learner. And the way we usually decide is to let you draw from these two pieces of paper on which I've written the two positions. If this is agreeable with both of you, we can do it that way. If you take one, please. You have the other. Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Learner. Teacher. All right, now the next thing we'll have to do is set the learner up so that he can get some sort of punishment. So, learner, would you step out here with me, please? You want to step right in here, learner, and have a seat there. You can leave your coat on the back of that chair if you will, please. Take it right off. That's fine. Have a seat right here. Pull yourself right up to the counter, please. Teacher, you may look on if you'd like while we get set up in here. Would you roll up your right sleeve, please? Left sleeve. Fine. Now what I'm going to do is strap down your arms to avoid any excessive movement on your part during the experiment. Is that too tight? Okay. This electrode is connected to the shock generator in the next room. And this electrode paste is to provide a good contact to avoid any blister or burn. All right, now let me explain to you, learner, exactly what's going to happen and what you're supposed to do. The teacher will read a list of word pairs to you like these. Blue girl, nice day, fat neck, and so forth. You are to try to remember each pair. For the next time through, the teacher will read only the first word or the first half of the word pair. For example, he will say blue. And then he'll read 4 other words, such as boy, girl, grass, hat. Now your job is to remember which one of these 4 other words was originally paired with blue. And you indicate your answer by pressing one of these 4 switches. Now can you reach those all right? That's fine. Now if the first word I just read, boy, had been paired with blue, you'd press the first switch, and this will indicate to the teacher that you thought it was the first word. If you thought it had been the second word, girl, you'd press the second switch, and so forth for the third word, the third switch, the fourth word, the fourth switch. Now, if you get it correct, fine. If you make an error, however, you'll be punished with an electric shock. So, of course, it is to your advantage that you learn all these word pairs as quickly as possible.
I should think so.
Do you have any questions now before we go into the next room?
No, but I think I should say this. About 2 years ago, I was in the Veterans Hospital in West Haven. And while there, they detected a heart condition. There's nothing serious, but as long as I'm having these shocks, how strong are they? How dangerous are they?
Well, no, although they may be painful, they're not dangerous. Anything else?
No, that's all.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room? This machine generates electric shocks, and when you press one of the switches all the way down, the learner gets a shock. When you release it, the shock stops, you see, like that. The switch will remain in this middle position after you've released it to show you which switches you've used on the board. Of course, if you were to press any one of them again, the learner would get another shock.
All subjects are given identical instructions and a sample shock. 50% of the subjects obey the experimenter's commands fully in the experiment depicted in this film.
Wrong.
435. Answer woman. N, white cloud. Horse, rock, house. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer, horse.
Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
Refuses to go on.
The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue. The next word is sad.
Want me to keep going?
Continue, please.
Oh, sad. Sad. Face, music, clown, girl. Correct. Next one, short. Sentence, movie, skirt, time. Answer, please. Wrong. 165 volts. Time.
Let me out.
That guy's hollering in there.
Continue, please. Go on.
Well, there's a lot of them here, you know. You'll have a heart condition there. You want me to go?
Just continue, please.
Sharp. Axe, needle, stick, blade. Answer, please. Wrong. I'm up to 180 volts.
Please continue, teacher.
Needle, you're gonna get a shock. 180 volts.
Ow. I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here.
Can't stand it now. I'm not gonna kill that man there. You hear him hollering?
As I said before, the shocks may be painful, but
yeah,
they're not
but he's in
dangerous.
there hollering. He can't stand it. What if something happens to him?
The experiment requires that you continue, teacher.
Yeah, but I'm not going to get that man sick in there. I mean, he's hollering in there. You know what I mean?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we must go on until he's learned all the word
I
pairs.
refuse to take the responsibility of getting hurt in there. I mean, he's in there hollering.
It's absolutely essential that you continue, teacher.
There's too many left here, and I mean, geez, he gets wrong here. There's too many of them left. I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow. Walk, dance, truck, music. Answer, please. Wrong. 195 volts. Dance.
Let me out of here. Let me out of here.
Continue,
My heart's
please.
bothering me. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let
Well,
me out.
I mean, he's
Let me out of
hollering
here. Let
there.
me out. Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let me out. Let me out.
See that? I mean, gee, I don't know.
Well, the experiment requires
Well,
that
I
you
mean,
continue.
I know it does, sir, but I mean, you don't know what he's getting in for. He's up to 195 volts. Answer, please. Something's happened to that man in there. Next one, gold, dollar, necklace, moon, paint. Something's happened to that man in there. You better check in on him, sir. He won't answer me or nothing.
Please continue. Go on, please.
You accept all the responsibility?
The responsibility is mine, correct. Please go on.
Gold, dollar, necklace, moon, paint. Answer, please. Are you all right? 405 volts. The answer is moon. Next one, hard. Stone, head, bread, work. Answer, please. The answer is head, 420 volts. Next one, wet. Night, grass, duck, cloth. The answer is duck. 435 volts. It says danger, severe shock here. Next X on the next one.
Continue, please.
435 volts. Next one, brave. Woman, soldier, dog, horse. Answer is woman, 450 volts. That's it.
Now continue using the last switch on the board, please. The 450 switch for each wrong answer. Continue, please.
I'm not getting no answer.
Okay, so asking a question regarding this video. Between the textbook information and this movie, what percentage of subjects attempted to deliver the most intensive shocks? That would be C, 50 to 65%. Depending upon whether you're looking at an individual experiment or globally across experiments, you'll have a range somewhere between 50 to 65. The global expectation across experiments was about 65%. So if you say 2/3 of the people went to the full end of the shock generator, that would be generally correct. Now moving on to another topic, interpersonal attraction. The processes of interpersonal attraction are actually fairly straightforward and easily understandable. We're going to work our way through some of the basics of it. What you're going to see in this topic is that a lot of the basic nature-nurture aspects of psychology fit right into interpersonal attraction. The next slide, however, will involve a few additional comments, actually the next couple of slides, which will require a little bit more thought. Now, in terms of attraction, what people generally find attractive has some cross-cultural components, and if they are cross-cultural and common across all human beings, then you would generally refer to them as being biologically based, and some culturally defined components. So things specific to your culture, which is really going to be an environmental aspect. If we look at some of the biological components, one of the things that has been established by doing cross-cultural work around the globe is that body shape is generally accepted as cross-cultural because there is a fairly limited range for the mean of hip to waist ratio that men prefer in women and that women prefer in men. So in terms of what men find attractive, there's generally relatively a 70% hip to waist ratio in women that they find maximally attractive. And when women are evaluating men, there is a relative 90% hip to waist ratio in men that seems to stand out in particular. In general, when you look at the biological build, the basic physical build of a woman and a man, there are going to be some common components that are going to be pretty consistent. For example, women generally have longer necks and smaller feet than men, and those are just two attributes in general. These differences tend to be cross-culturally recognized as beautiful. And what you wind up seeing in a broader sense is that if you looked at a prototypical human female and a prototypical human male and made a laundry list of the physical differences between them, everything on that list becomes the basis for which attraction actually resides. Okay, it's only the actual physical differences between people that become the basic background context for which things are identified as beautiful, and always in the particular manner in which they exist. So women tend to have longer, thinner necks than men. Men generally prefer longer, thinner necks. Of course, this is not a guarantee 100% of the time, but when you look cross-culturally, a statistical average would indicate that this is the case. Women have smaller hands, smaller feet. Both of those tend to be identified as characteristics of beauty in men in general. When you look in the opposite direction, women tend to prefer men that are taller. Generally, men are taller than women in general. They also prefer men to have more muscle mass and to have a particular shape, like a larger chest and a thinner waistline, to have less body fat than women. Those are all things that are generally considered attractive by women when they're evaluating men. Those are some of the basic biological differences. When you look at the culturally confined or environmental aspects, there are components that have to be evaluated per culture. If we just stick with North America, for example, generally there is a pattern of clothing for men and a pattern of clothing for women, pattern of jewelry for men and a pattern of jewelry for women. Traditionally, if you go back 100 or more years and follow fashions backwards in time for hundreds of years, it has been true in Western culture that typically men have worn slacks of some sort, pants, and women oftentimes have worn dresses. That pattern existing for hundreds of years only really started to change around World War II, at least in terms of North America. What happened is, which is a story that you're probably somewhat familiar with, because most of the men were drafted into World War II to go off to war, women had to take over the jobs in the factories. And dresses in factories are not safe. So the women had to switch over to the men's traditional clothing, which are oftentimes overalls or jeans, which are safer for a factory environment. When the war ended, most of the women went back to wearing dresses, but the opportunity to wear slacks became more available through the fashion industry. And it just became a change in fashion because some women found slacks being less restrictive than dresses. And of course, there's a social aspect to it as well. What do slacks mean? Well, slacks meant, maybe I worked in a factory and I was able to do a difficult job. It might be an aspect of showing off a little bit that you had done a factory job at one time. But as time goes by, these kinds of characteristics, the meaning of slacks and the fashion industry's feeding of the process begins to change the fashions over time. Up until around the early 60s, for the most part, the typical gender lines for clothing were still largely there. Men wore slacks, women wore dresses. In fact, even when you look at a man's suit today, a man's three-piece suit was originally styled almost as far back as the late 1400s, early 1500s, where there's a vest, a jacket, and a pair of slacks. And it has remained almost unchanged for the past 500 years. For women, there's a whole series of dresses that are used over this entire time period as well. But come the early 60s, as we've talked about the 1960s in the personality chapter, and the social changes that occurred largely as a result of the Vietnam War, and other kinds of social aspects of social protesting that occurred during that time as well, more women start to wear slacks. And that simply comes about through mostly youth culture, and youth culture is rebelling against traditional culture. So as the war in Vietnam is protested and a variety of other social aspects are protested, people begin to change their clothing to look in a new way. Men stop cutting their hair short. They begin growing beards and mustaches, which is something you did not see for the past 60 years or so in North America. They begin wearing jeans. Up to this point, mostly what you would see men wear in terms of slacks was what you would call casual dress slacks or dress slacks today. But at that time, it was everyday clothing. When men start to switch over to wearing jeans every day, that was actually a rebellious fashion statement indicating that they were rejecting the need to wear these casual dress slacks on a daily basis. Women started wearing men's clothing, so they started wearing jeans. And from this point in the 60s, jeans picks up as such a common fashion attribute for both males and females that it completely changes and never goes back to the way it had been. The standard man's suit has not really changed much since the past 500 years, and it hasn't changed certainly from the 60s, but as an aspect of clothing that men would be expected to wear regardless of the type of office job they have is completely gone. And all of these changes largely take place during the 1960s. So when you take a look at the image on the bottom right portion of the screen, there's a man and a woman both dressed in fairly traditional clothing. That should look fairly average or common to you and not really make anything seem odd. The next image to the left is a woman wearing men's clothing. Now, a woman wearing men's clothing is actually something that takes place now on a fairly regular basis. A woman's pantsuit, for example, is styled directly off of a man's suit. And in fact, women in their dress clothing are copying male clothing. This is part of changes in the fashion industry that came out of all of the social upheaval in the 1960s. This particular image may look slightly odd, in particular because the woman is wearing a standard tie, which women generally don't do. Without that tie, it would just be a pantsuit and you might not think anything of it. If you move to the last image, you have a man in a short dress, and that is typically not seen. So it would stand out as the oddest component because you generally don't typically see it. It is not fitting gender standard for men's clothing. Now, what sorts of things support attraction? Well, there are 4 things listed here, which are really the very basic aspect of it. Proximity. If you are near someone else, you're simply more attracted to that individual. If you see them every day and nothing inherently bad happens, you're simply going to be more attracted to that person. You may actually remember this lesson back from when we talked about habituation all the way back in the developmental chapter about how anything that is habituated is simply chosen more likely than something that is brand new. And that is exactly what's happening here. The process of habituation is driving part of the aspect of attraction. Similarity. Opposites do not attract. That is an incorrect idea. Similarity, the greater similarity between you and another person, whether it's just a friendship or a romantic relationship, will add to the likelihood that you will become friends or companions. Gain-loss theory. Gain-loss theory is essentially a basic way to add the number of positive and negative interactions between an individual to see what is the general ratio between the two. In an earlier video in this chapter, I mentioned how there was an 8-to-1 ratio between a bad first impression and the number of positive events that have to occur later in the future just to wipe it out, to become equal. And that kind of thinking really falls under the level of gain-loss theory. You can videotape a couple speaking to each other and then rate the comments that they make to each other as either positive or negative, and then form a ratio of the positive to negative events that occur between these individuals. Generally, what research finds is that if there is a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of positive events, then the relationship will be about at its lowest level that you would identify it as positive. Think about yourself and your best friend. How many times does your friend speak in which they say something positive or neutral to you as opposed to something explicitly negative to you? If it's a friend, it's probably mostly positive events, positive statements. Think about a person that you don't like. When you speak to that person, how many things do they say that you perceive as actually negative? It's probably a much higher rate. And you'll see that this ratio that you can establish will actually give you a quantitative basis to rate the degree of positivity or negativity of that relationship. And then physical attractiveness. The basics of physical attractiveness in this case essentially come from the previous two slides, talking about the biological bases as well as the environmental bases for attractiveness. Now we can take this bundle of events and apply them in a fairly typical scenario. This will actually look like something that you would see on a Oprah Winfrey episode, but watch this video and then we'll have a question about the material afterward.
Suspecting member of the
And attractive people are naturally more appealing to us than unattractive people. We're back in England for our next example that shows us just how far this can take us.
Meet Ruth and Rebecca. Rebecca's classically attractive. Ruth's more on the plain side. They're going to demonstrate that how you look affects how you're treated. They're going to struggle up staircases at opposite ends of Liverpool Street Station in London with heavy bags, and we'll be filming in this workman's hut. First up, Ruth. How long before a knight in shining armour rescues this damsel in distress?
Oh, that's so kind of you.
Helped at last, but by two women, and it took 45 seconds. Now Rebecca's turn. How long before she's rescued?
Would you mind? Just shattered. I'm just trying to get to the top of those stairs there. Can you do the other one at the same time?
All of 8 seconds.
Oh, she's very kind of you.
Ruth is occasionally saved, but it takes longer. On average, 70 seconds.
Turned up.
Rebecca's average, 24 seconds.
Just stop by these phones here would be great. Thanks.
You'd be forgiven for thinking that this caveman behaviour is more about sex than chivalry.
Yeah, pretty girl, needed bags carrying upstairs. I'm a sucker for that sort of thing. Every time. It's from my grandfather, I'm told. He was a charmer too.
But there's more to it than that.
Thanks.
We have a tendency to think highly of beautiful
And just
people.
because they are very, very delicate, sorry.
Go on, what's in them?
Family heirlooms, would you believe? Bringing them back from my mum.
And we want to be near them, as if some of their glory will reflect onto us.
Have you got a few minutes to spare? Because if he doesn't turn up, I'd need to get them into a taxi up there. I'm going to be really rude now and ask one more favour. Could you lend me some money?
How much you need?
Can you do them all three?
The men are mesmerised. They do
Sorry.
anything Rebecca
Oh,
asks.
you're so strong. Thank you so much.
Although they clearly go out of their way for a pretty girl,
You're a true gentleman. I really appreciate this.
they deny that looks have anything to do with
All
it.
day and I'm really thirsty and I wouldn't mind getting a drink and something to eat.
Oh, well, that's all I've got on me at the moment. You're more than welcome to it, though. If somebody needed help, I'd like to think that I would help everybody across the range, regardless if they're good-looking, attractive, smelly, well-presented, or whatever.
In this scenario, we saw that male compassion and helping is biased by female attractiveness. In fact, guys reacted to the pretty woman's predicament 3 times faster than they did to the ordinary-looking woman. A second thing to notice is the operation of the foot-in-the-door tactic used by the attractive woman once she had snared a good Samaritan. After he did a small good deed, she upped the ante with ever-increasing requests, demands which he caved into without question.
So the expression of the foot in the door technique is actually a good opportunity to see it here, because it's not like when we were talking about compliance earlier, an aspect of constantly buying something more, like a warranty and a repair service, for example, but rather just being asked to perform jobs for somebody or tasks for somebody oftentimes fits into the concept of foot in the door technique more than other types of things. So let's take a look at this question here, and we'll see how this applies. If helping is partly controlled by attractiveness, then which previous lesson from this chapter applies? And the answer is E, all of the above. Every aspect from A through D, attitudes, attribution theory, impression formation, and stereotypes, are all components that wind up affecting the patterns of behavior you just saw in the video. And the reason why they all apply is because in the field of social psychology, as I've mentioned in the very beginning of these lectures, you typically are looking at a fully functioning person. You're not trying to just evaluate a particular sub-process like learning or memory or sensation or perception or psychophysics or something else. Instead, you're looking at the entire combination of all things from the brain. In a scenario like that, all of the previous lessons from this social psychology chapter apply, and so they all come to bear on this one particular event. So to take it as one simple answer that, why the men helped as just one thing is absolutely not correct. Altruism is defined as a behavior that is primarily, not exclusively, other-directed. The original and oftentimes current philosophical belief about altruism is that it's a pattern of behavior that you do that only helps somebody else, in which you don't get anything out of it. But that does not fit anything with the known facts about human behavior. Everything we've done this semester indicates that if you exhibit a behavior, there's going to have to be some positive consequence that maintains it, which means you always get something out of it. If a person does something, does it repeatedly, then they are getting something out of it. They may not be aware of it, you may not be aware of it, but there is something, some positive consequence, which is maintaining it. If not, the avoidance of a punishment is also a possibility there as well. But those are the only possibilities that would maintain behavior over a long period of time. So if we look at this in terms of modern psychology, altruism is a time during which you help somebody, which you will get some benefit from, but most of the helping is probably directed toward the other individual. So in this case like this, you were essentially applying a cost-reward approach. How many problems will you get if you help this person? What will it actually cost you socially, financially, in time to be able to help this other person? And what are you actually going to get back from it? Now, when you look at this, there are a few standard aspects of altruistic behavior that typically stand out. One, the norm of social responsibility. The expectation that we help others in need is a standard for society. It's an expectation that people have, that if somebody needs help, that you should just naturally help them. In the norm of reciprocity, the idea is that you should help when other people need help and that they will help you when you're in need. That's the general idea. Of course, that doesn't have to hold true. There may be times when you help other people and other people don't help you, but these are very broad-based expectations from society that you typically see anywhere you go on the globe. This is normal human behavior, to see somebody else in need and then to feel empathetic toward that person and then to try to help them. But to help them only so much as cost-reward approach actually allows you to help them. And finally, the emergency situation. In emergency situations, bystanders will oftentimes step in and help the individual in need. But the likelihood that you'll be helped increases as there are fewer and fewer people present. So in emergency situations where you may actually be placing yourself in danger, people tend to avoid engaging in that emergency situation if other people are around that might step in instead. And so people oftentimes do not help other individuals when a lot of other people are around. But if an event occurs that requires emergency action and there are very few people around, many people will use that expression of empathy to engage the situation and start to help. Here's a great opportunity to see this in these scenarios in this video.
Suspecting member of the Liverpool Street Station in London. A drunk lies on the pavement. In fact, he's our actor Peter, but these passers-by aren't to know that. And since he looks the worse for wear, not critically ill, they ignore him. Helping would be inconvenient or even risky. He lies there for 20 minutes and no one raises an eyebrow. This time, we've dressed Peter as a respectable city gent. How long before he's rescued now that he looks the part?
Hello, sir. How are you today?
I'm all right, thanks.
6 seconds. She even calls him sir. And suddenly, everyone's a good Samaritan.
Do you suffer from epilepsy?
No.
While you're lying on the floor in the rain?
After a couple of minutes, even the police turn up.
I would just hate to be in his position of feeling ill and nobody helping and walking past, so we'd just like to check that he was okay.
And I thought, well, it's wet, so he must really be ill because he's going to ruin his suit anyway.
Our actress Ruth takes Peter's place. She's not a drunk, but she's also not a city gent. How long before she gets help? Four minutes have passed, and 34 people have passed.
People don't really want to know that they just haven't got the time. Well, they have got the time, they just don't want to get involved.
But it's more complicated than that. If the street were deserted, a passerby would probably go to the rescue. But these strangers have silently formed a temporary group with a rule: don't help. Like the woman who faced impossible questions in the service station, they're afraid to stand out from the crowd. So like the people in our smoke experiment, they won't take action if nobody else does, even against their own better judgment. This woman, for instance, has clearly spotted Ruth, but she conforms to the rule and does nothing.
You all right? You all right?
Watch what happens, though, when someone else helps.
You all right, you sure?
She suddenly finds herself in a different group with a new rule: to help.
She don't look well, does she?
You all right, yeah? You sure?
First I thought she was dead. Then I sort of checked to see if she was breathing or not. And I looked around and I couldn't believe that no one had noticed her, because there was a bloke sat there just absorbed in reading a newspaper.
Whatever we do that other people notice has a ripple effect, for better or for worse.
Peter's now having the same problem. This time, we've swapped his suit for casual clothes. He's not drunk, and we've asked him to act like he's in pain.
Help! Help! Help me. Please, somebody. Help me. Help me, somebody. Please help me. Help me. Help me. Help me. Please, somebody help me. Please, somebody help me.
It's always very distressing to watch situations like this where people are obviously suffering and no one's actually helping them. But what we have here is two conflicting rules. One is the rule that we ought to help, and the other is the rule that we ought to do what everybody else is doing. And here you have effectively a group of strangers who are exerting the pressure not to intervene, not to help. And it's very difficult to rebel.
Not doing something appropriate and right when it is called for can be considered an aspect of the evil of inaction. This is related to intentionally doing bad things, or the evil of action.
So from that video you see, people are less likely to help if there are more people around. If there are fewer people present, then it is more likely that somebody will help. This is actually a long-standing process known to social psychologists since the 1960s. In this new topic, we talk about aggression. Aggression is also a fairly straightforward topic. Aggression is generally defined as any physical or verbal behavior that's intended to hurt someone or destroy something. That is a very easy process to understand. Now, there are a variety of basic biopsychosocial explanations for aggressive behavior, biological effects, psychological effects, and social effects, and you have to deal with them each as they occur, based upon what aspects of biology would actually influence the likelihood of aggression, or what types of personal life history under psychological effects would actually do that, as well as the social contexts. And those are not that difficult to pull apart. If we take a look at these biological and environmental factors, one of the things regarding biological approaches to understanding aggression is coming from the activity of the amygdala. The amygdala's activity generally is related to fear and aggression. And under those circumstances, if there is an amygdala with greater activity for any number of different reasons, because it is drug-induced, because in one example we talked about in the personality chapter, a cancerous tumor is pressing on the amygdala, causing more action potentials to be generated in that general vicinity, the person simply will become more aggressive. Higher levels of testosterone, which are probably not a big surprise, also leads to greater degrees of aggression. And in fact, the common term roid rage, oftentimes associated with anger for individuals that have taken testosterone in too high a doses over a long period of time, and then they become very aggressive. And a Y chromosome as well. Of all people on the planet, the one group that you can kind of selectively pull aside to identify as being generally more aggressive are males. And it's that Y chromosome in general. If it's the Y chromosome or not, or an interplay between the Y chromosome and something else, is a separate issue. But males in general are the ones responsible for most of the aggression in society. Women are aggressive, but just to a lesser degree. So when you hear these silly, nonsensical statements like, the world would be a better place if men did not exist, because men are the ones that are all aggressive, you would simply be left with a world filled with women that are also aggressive, but to a lesser degree, and display their aggression differently than men do. So whereas men oftentimes are more likely than women to become physically aggressive, if you made all the men disappear, you would still have women who are physically aggressive and also verbally aggressive. So there'd be a different standard for aggression. So let's look at the last question and finish this chapter up. Which do not predict aggression? And the correct answer there is E. All of the above predict aggression. Criminal history of violence predicts aggression. Gender predicts aggression. Higher concentrations of testosterone predict aggression. And XY chromosomal pattern also predicts aggression. Going back to B, higher concentration of testosterone, that is even seen with women. When women have to take testosterone as part of a medical treatment, they become more aggressive during that time period. And when the medical treatment is stopped so that they stop taking injections of testosterone, the level of verbal and physical aggression drops off again. It's one of the ways in which you can actually identify the role of aggression rather than just testosterone being something present in men. You can actually see the same effect in women as well.